On a March morning in the year 2015, a small crew of court officers arrived at an apartment on the east side of Detroit, Michigan. They were not detectives. They were not there for a crime. They had come to carry out an eviction, the most ordinary task in the world. The tenant was not home, so they let themselves in to begin clearing the property. In the living room, there was a large freezer. When they opened it, the case they were standing inside of stopped being about unpaid rent. It became one of the most disturbing child welfare failures this country has ever recorded. And it is only one of the 5 cases we are covering tonight. 5 children, 5 homes in the state of Michigan, and one question that connects almost every single one of them. Because in most of these stories, the danger was not hidden. It was reported. It was written down. It was placed inside a file. A teacher saw it. A nurse documented it. A caseworker visited. The system knew. And the children died anyway. The cases you are about to hear span more than a decade, from the year 2005 to the year 2022. Some of these children starved. One was chained. Some were beaten. And in almost every single one of them, the warning signs were right there, in plain sight, written down by adults whose job it was to notice. Every name in this video is real. Every fact has been checked against court records, medical examiner findings, and verified news reporting. We do not guess. We do not exaggerate. We tell you exactly what happened and exactly how it was allowed to happen. This is Dark Truth Crime. Before we go any further, do one small thing for me. Drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there at this very moment. I read every single one of them, and I want to know just how far this story travels tonight. Let us begin. Case 1. Mary Welch, Solon Township, Kent County, Michigan, 2018. 8 pounds. That is what Mary Welch weighed when sheriff's deputies reached her on the 2nd day of August, in the year 2018. She was nearly 10 months old. A healthy infant of that age weighs somewhere between 18 and 20 pounds. Mary weighed less than half of that. One responding deputy later described her eyes and cheeks as sunken into her head, and her body as cold to the touch. The assistant prosecutor would later tell a courtroom that the child looked, in her words, like a 100-year-old baby, all skin and bone. Mary had not been born this way. She had not been premature. She had been slowly wasting away inside her own home, in plain sight of the 2 adults who were supposed to love her most. Her parents were Seth Welch and Tatiana Fusari. They lived in Solon Township, just north of Grand Rapids, and from the outside they were a young family raising 3 small children. But Seth Welch had built a public identity online around his deep distrust of the medical profession. In one video, he referred to doctors as the priesthood of what he called a medical cult. He posted about his religious beliefs, about his suspicion of vaccines, and about his refusal to bring his children before pediatricians. Court documents would later reveal that 2 of the couple's 3 children had never once been seen by a licensed medical doctor. While he performed that conviction for an audience, his infant daughter was starving a few feet away, inside the same home. Tatiana Fusari was present every day. According to an affidavit, both parents admitted that they had noticed Mary was underweight and unwell for at least a month before her death. They did not seek help. The reasons they gave investigators were a mix of religious belief, a fear that Child Protective Services would take their children away, and a general distrust of doctors. On the day Mary stopped breathing, the response was not urgency, it was delay. Seth Welch later acknowledged on a recorded emergency call that he had contacted an attorney roughly 90 minutes before he ever called for help, because he was unsure of what to do. By the time deputies arrived, there was nothing anyone could do. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy testified that it was one of the most severe cases of malnutrition and dehydration he had encountered in his career. The cause of death was ruled malnutrition with dehydration due to neglect. The manner of death was homicide. Both parents were charged with felony murder and first-degree child abuse. In June of the year 2020, Seth Welch was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Tatiana Fusari was tried separately. Her defense argued that she had herself been a victim of her husband's abuse and control and that she acted under duress. In November of the year 2021, a jury rejected that argument and convicted her as well. She received the same sentence, life without parole. Mary Welch lived nearly 10 months. She never saw a doctor. She weighed 8 pounds when she died, in a home with two parents who saw her every single day and chose, morning after morning, to do nothing. If you had been a neighbor and you had seen that child, do you believe you would have said something? Tell me honestly in the comments. Because in cases like this one, silence is never neutral. Silence is a decision. Case 2. Ricky Holland. Williamston, Ingham County, Michigan, 2005. His teachers remembered him as polite, attentive, a little boy who arrived at school every morning and asked, quietly, whether breakfast was still being served, and then ate everything in front of him and asked if there was more. His name was Richard Holland, but everyone called him Ricky. He was 7 years old, and before he died, more than one adult inside the school system had seen the warning signs and tried to do something about them. Ricky came into the home of Tim and Lisa Holland as a foster child when he was about 3 years old. The couple later adopted him, along with several of his younger siblings. 2 employees of the State Department of Human Services would later testify that the Hollands received subsidy payments for their adopted children, including a higher monthly amount connected to Ricky's documented special needs. One of his early teachers remembered Ricky as well-behaved in class and came to believe that Lisa Holland had exaggerated his behavioral problems to his doctors. That gap between the calm boy the teachers saw and the troubled, difficult child his mother described to professionals sits at the center of this entire case. At home, the picture was very different from the paperwork. Trial testimony described food withheld as punishment. It described Ricky being restrained, at times tied up, and isolated from the other children. His adoptive father later testified that in the last week of Ricky's life, the boy was listless and unable to walk, no longer eating, drinking, speaking, or acknowledging the people around him. In late June and early July of the year 2005, Ricky was struck in the head, and he did not receive medical care. He did not die immediately. He suffered for days while his condition worsened, and no one took him to a hospital. On the first day of July, he died. What happened next is what turned this from a private tragedy into a public deception. Ricky's body was taken from the home and left in a rural, marshy area. The following morning, on the second day of July, his parents reported him missing. They told the public that Ricky, who they said had run off before, had vanished. The community believed them. Roughly 1,700 volunteers, along with hundreds of law enforcement officers, searched for 9 days. There were canine units, mounted patrols, and dive teams. Strangers who had never met this child gave up their weekends to look for him, and the entire time, the people who had reported him missing knew he was never coming back. The truth did not surface for 6 months. In January of the year 2006, Tim Holland led investigators to the place where Ricky's body had been left, and he began to talk. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for his testimony, and he was sentenced to 30 to 60 years in prison. Lisa Holland went to trial. Prosecutors called teachers, medical staff, and others who had each, at separate moments, seen something wrong and tried to report it. In October of the year 2006, the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence was mandatory: life in prison without the possibility of parole. At sentencing, the judge, who fought back tears, told her plainly that she had buried her dog but thrown away her child. The Ricky Holland case became one of the most studied child welfare failures in Michigan history, and the reason is precise. The failure was not that no one noticed. People noticed. People reported. The breakdown happened in what occurred after those reports were filed. This case took us a great deal of time to research properly. Court documents, archived news reports, appellate filings, and trial testimony. We went through all of it, because Ricky deserves to have his story told correctly, and not turned into something cheap. If that matters to you, take 1 second and hit the like button. Subscribe to Dark Truth Crime if you have not already, and turn on the notification bell so the next case reaches you. And drop a comment telling me which part of this story has stayed with you the most so far. I am still here, and I am reading every one. Now, back to the cases. Case 3. Callista Springer, Centerville, St. Joseph County, Michigan, 2008. The firefighters reached her. That is the detail that makes this case so hard to sit with. Help arrived. They came through the smoke, and it still was not enough because of the way she had been left. Callista Springer was 16 years old. On the 27th day of February, in the year 2008, a fire broke out in her second-floor bedroom in the small community of Centerville, Michigan. Callista could not get out. She had been secured to her bed with a chain fitted around her waist and fastened to the bed frame. She could not run. She could not reach a window. She died of smoke inhalation in a room she physically could not leave. The chain was not new. According to court filings, Callista had been restrained at night for years. Her father, Anthony Springer, and her stepmother, Marcia Springer, said they tied her up because she would wander, take things, and behave unpredictably during the night, and they described her as a child with special needs. Relatives and others, however, described something else entirely, a long pattern of mistreatment hidden behind the walls of an ordinary-looking home. And here's the part that connects Callista to every other child in this video. The danger was known. The earliest complaint about how she was being treated, cited in later court records, went back to roughly the year 1999, nearly a decade before her death. The state's child protective system had been to that home, but court records show the last meaningful contact was nearly 3 years before the fire. After Callista's death, her father and stepmother were charged. A jury cleared them of murder, but convicted them of torture and child abuse. Anthony Springer was sentenced to a term of 25 to 50 years. Marcia Springer received a sentence in the range of 8 to 19 years. Callista's family later filed a civil lawsuit against the state, arguing that the system had failed to act on a long and documented history. The courts ultimately ruled that while the handling of her case was, in their words, less than exemplary, the legal standard for state liability had not been met. That legal conclusion does not change the human one. The documentation on Callista Springer existed for years. The decision to leave her where she was, in that condition, was not made once. It was made over and over again, by more than one person, across a very long time. Callista did not die because no one knew. She died in part because the knowing never turned into action soon enough. Case 4, Stony Blair and Stephen Barry, Detroit, Michigan, discovered 2015. Now we return to where we began, to the freezer and the eviction crew and the apartment on Detroit's east side. When court officers arrived at the home of Mitchell Blair on the 24th day of March in the year 2015, she was not there. They began removing furniture, and when they went to move a white freezer in the living room, they found inside it the bodies of 2 children. They were Stony Ann Blair, who was 13, and her younger brother Stephen Gage Barry, who was 9. Investigators would come to believe that Stephen had died in August of the year 2012, and that Stony had died the following May, in the year 2013. That means their bodies had been hidden in that freezer for more than 2 years, while life in the apartment continued around them. Their mother, Mitchell Blair, was located nearby and arrested. The bodies had to thaw for days before autopsies could even be performed. When the medical examiner completed that work, the deaths were ruled homicides, with blunt force trauma identified as the cause. What makes this case so difficult is not only what happened, but what happened afterward. During the years the children's bodies remained hidden, Mitchell Blair continued to receive public assistance connected to them. She kept her surviving children, and according to investigators, she warned them into silence. They had witnessed what happened. They were afraid, so they said nothing. The state had been inside that family's life before. Abuse and neglect concerns involving Mitchell Blair had been raised in earlier years, and the children had remained in her custody. When Mitchell Blair finally stood before the court, she offered no remorse. She told the judge she did not regret what she had done and referred to her own murdered children with contempt. She claimed she had acted because she believed the 2 children had harmed a younger sibling, though she acknowledged she had not witnessed it and had never brought it to the authorities. The judge was unmoved. Mitchell Blair pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and was sentenced in July of the year 2015 to life in prison without parole. Stony was 13 years old. Stephen was 9. The state of Michigan had been inside their family's history, had documented concern, and the children remained where they were. 2 young lives, ended and then hidden, while every external system that might have noticed simply did not. Case 5, Chase Allen, Detroit, Michigan, 2022. Detroit would face this nightmare a second time. Different family, different year. The same freezer at the end of the story. On the 24th day of June, in the year 2022, Detroit police officers went to a home on the city's west side to perform a welfare check on a child. As they spoke with the adult inside, an officer would later say, "Something simply did not feel right." They searched. In a freezer in the basement, they found the body of a small boy. His name was Chase Allen. He was 3 years old. He had been blind, and according to what his mother later told investigators, his body had been placed in that freezer months earlier, in March of that same year. His mother was Azurity France. There were 5 other children in the home when officers arrived, and they were taken into protective care. Investigators learned that this household had been visited by Child Protective Services before. Court records indicated a history of abuse concerns and ignored court-ordered mental health treatment. Azurity France told police that she had grown frustrated with Chase, that she had struck and kicked him, and that when he did not wake the following morning, she hid his body rather than call for help. She told a detective that she had been too frightened to call for emergency services because she did not want her other children taken from her. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide caused by blunt force trauma to the head. Before her trial could begin, in July of the year 2024, Azurity France pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. In exchange, charges including felony murder, first-degree child abuse, torture, and concealing a death were dismissed. She was sentenced to a term of 35 to 60 years in prison. At sentencing, the judge said something that belongs in this video, because it captures the thread running through all of these cases. The judge noted that Azurity France had herself been a victim of childhood abuse, a lack of mental health treatment, and the failings of a system that, in the judge's view, should have removed her children from her custody before Chase ever died. The judge said it did not excuse what happened, but it explained a great deal, and the judge added that she wished intervention could have come sooner. Sooner. That single word haunts almost every story we are telling tonight. Chase Allen was 3 years old. He could not see, and he could not protect himself, and the systems built to stand in for a child who cannot speak for himself were aware of that home before he died. 5 cases. And the thread running through almost all of them is the same. The system knew. Ricky Holland's teachers saw a starving, gentle boy and reported what they saw. Callista Springer's home had drawn complaints going back years. Mitchell Blair's family had been on the radar of Child Protective Services before 2 of her children ended up in a freezer. Chase Allen lived in a home that had been visited before he died, and even the sentencing judge said the system should have acted sooner. This is not a story about a handful of unlucky accidents. When the same pattern repeats across years, across counties, across completely different families, it stops being a series of individual mistakes and starts being something structural. Child protective work in this country is carried out by people who are, in many places, stretched far past what research considers safe. Caseloads run high, resources run thin. Schools are not always trained for what to do when a child quietly disappears. And communities, all of us, too often assume that someone else will be the one to act. So let me say the part that matters most, the part I hope you carry out of this video. If you ever see something that frightens you, involving a child, you do not need to be certain. You do not need proof. You need enough concern to make a call. Teachers, neighbors, coaches, relatives, the person who lives next door. One phone call can change the entire direction of a child's life. You will rarely ever hear about the times a single call quietly saved someone. You only hear about the cases where no one made it. These are not distant history lessons. They are recent. They are real. And somewhere, right now, in every state in this country, there are children whose names no camera will ever record because no one has yet made the call. If you stayed with me through all 5 of these cases, then you already understand what this channel is about. We do not look away. We do not chase the cheapest version of a story. We go through the records, the court documents, and the verified reporting, and we tell you what happened and how it was allowed to happen. So before you go, do these last few things. Drop a comment and tell me, one more time, where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there right now. Hit the like button because it genuinely helps this channel reach more people. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how often the warning signs are right there in plain sight. And subscribe to Dark Truth Crime with the notification bell turned on, because we are not finished. These cases are not finished. And the children who never made a single headline are still waiting for someone to refuse to look away. This is Dark Truth Crime. Thank you for watching.